Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on high-performance computing. Today, my guest is from HPC Wales. We have Martyn Guest. He's the technical director at the company. So, Martyn, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much, Richard. Delighted to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. You know, I've heard a lot about HPC Wales, but I thought we could kind of do an overview here. And I brought your slides up. Why don't we start there?
Okay, that's great. So probably just looking on the title slide, the point which I'd like really to focus on at various points is actually on the aspect of collaboration. I mean, HPC Wales itself, and I believe David Craddock gave a pretty good podcast a while back introducing the project. Its primary aim is really to deliver impact and innovation from academic research to build the knowledge economy in Wales. And a key part of that process is actually the collaboration and the evolution of partnerships within the project. So if we come on to the first file, which is giving an overview really of the presentation itself, I'm going to try and split this into three parts. So I'll give you a quick overview of HPC Wales today. As I mentioned, the current status and a critical role of partnerships and collaborations in the project. We take a quick look at a perspective of some of the Welsh companies who are using high-performance computing and really look at some of the priority sector areas where the customer base for HPC Wales is actually stemming from. It's worth pointing out that the major focus here is on SMEs, so the American so-called missing middle, and there's about 190,000 SMEs in Wales, so there is an audience out there, and it's really our task to engage with and build high-performance computing within that community. So following that sort of pretty rapid overview of the project, we'll take a look at the infrastructure, the distributed computing network, which has been developed. I mean, it's still growing, but we look at the phased deployment of technology within that network. And then finally come on to some of the support services and some of the challenges, I think, that we face and that we're overcoming literally as we speak. If you take a look at the map, there's Wales on the right-hand side. Maybe the biggest aspect of partnership, it is a major project involving all of the major HEIs, so the higher education institutions in Wales. So from Cardiff and Swansea, Glamorgan in the south, up to Aberystwyth and Bangor in the north, and of course including the University of Wales, which has various institutions spawned out across the Principality. On the next slide, a number of things I think which are worth focusing on again in this idea of partnership. On the left-hand side, you'll see initially on the top Microsoft, Fujitsu and Intel, really the main technology partners in the project, with actually Fujitsu UK as the lead technology provider. Underneath Exede, of which of course will be very well known to insideHPC, the extreme science and engineering discovery environment, and they have been pretty critical in helping us move forward with this challenge. And then down at the bottom, NAG, so the Numerical Algorithms Group, who are focused on computational science and engineering support. The Venn diagram in the middle, really, one could spend the whole presentation focusing on that, but let me just say there are a variety of computational services involving consultancy and support being provided to both academic and industrial customers. And a fundamental thing which underpins the whole project, although it's tempting to focus on technology, is actually the skills and training activities, which is really trying to introduce, both in terms of Welsh universities and higher education institutions, a fundamental idea about HPC, and then to be carrying out training and skills to the customer base to ensure that when they get access to the technology, they fully understand the potential and they receive help ongoing with their work. And on the right-hand side, we're looking at the funding agencies who've contributed to what is a £40 million, so $60 million project. So BIS, the Department for Business and Innovation Skills, the Welsh Government itself, Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, HEFQ, And finally, the European Regional Development Funds and the European Social Fund. So there's a lot of money coming in from Europe through the Welsh Government to actually fund the project. If we move on to slide 4, this is really looking at the priority sector areas peculiar to Wales, and this naturally provides a focus for the work that we do. There's no real surprises in here. It's probably worth saying that most nations will capture these types of areas, and your insideHPC community will be well aware of the potential of HPC in each of these different sector areas. Particular growth, I think, during the first real year of the project in the life sciences arena and in energy and environment, particularly modeling climate change and weather patterns. But we expect to see a fairly even footprint of work being deployed across these priority sector areas. If we look at slide 5, this is actually just a few comments from some of our existing customers today, and we did, right at the beginning of the project, carry out an omnibus survey looking at the potential for HPC. And the results really, I think, of that survey are captured to some extent in the comments from our existing customers. So speeding up the research process, you can see that on the left from Callan Cardio and Graham Foster, and also on the far right in work really which is being undertaken to understand economic trends. The ability to develop new projects, new products, clearly again important, looking at heritage medical, and the ability to actually enhance the quality of simulations. This is shown in the quote from Notre. So different aspects of HPC and the potential benefits that can bring. The next slide, moving away a bit from the customer base, now looking at the distributed HPC infrastructure. The map on the right, I guess, captures what is a fundamental part of HPC Wales. So we resisted the temptation to stand up one big supercomputer in one institution, and we went for what on paper looks to me perhaps a more complex hub and spoke model, with the hubs in Swansea and Cardiff focused really down in the south, so-called Tier 1 sites at Aberystwyth in the middle, Bangor up north, and Glamorgan in the south, and a number of smaller institutions carrying so-called Tier 2 systems. That distributed infrastructure is actually supported through a private network. This is through PSBA, the Public Sector Broadband Aggregation, and it will be a phased deployment. In response to the rather obvious question, why did you go distributed? There were a number of reasons, but probably the main driver was to establish ownership and a real engagement from each of those higher education institutions into the project. So having local support staff to basically feed and water systems, to work with the local community to bring that community onto the systems. The distributed nature, I think, really does help foster that type of engagement. And if you look in the clips on the left of that foil, then you'll see phase 1 is now complete. So this involves systems really through all of the institutions. Phase 2, we're actually deploying 12,000 cores of Sandy Bridge across both the Cardiff and Swansea systems. Phase 3, that's towards in the last year and a half of the project. I think the technical specifications there will be really driven by the requirements of the user community. We don't want to double guess those. We don't want to be giving them something they don't need. And it may well involve enhancements to the existing systems that we put out there. So fatter memory nodes will be a good example. And finally, on the bottom of the foil, really this local access and support that I've already mentioned. So training, outreach, and technical teams at each of the sites is a fundamental component of what we can offer. If we move on to the next slide, this is number 7. We're looking at the initial deployment. So a load of technical specs there about the initial Intel Westmere-based systems that we rolled out at the beginning of the project. Couple of things worth noting: definitely systems now in each of the key sites, so the community is becoming fully engaged. And then systems dual boot Windows HPC nodes on the Cardiff, and large memory systems. So again, trying to ease the familiarity of those who've used desktop Windows systems coming on to HPC Wales, and then recognizing that large memory is often a requirement of new users, and in fact the 0.5 terabyte RX 900 system shown there is probably the most popular of all the systems which are actually out there at the moment. The next slide, number 8, is looking at the projects, the 5 highest users of CPU cycles existing at this point, well, in October 2012. So the reds are really showing a couple of projects really from advanced manufacturing and engineering, so catalysis and rheological modeling. The grayish color really are life sciences, so a lot of activity around genome type work, and what we're trying to show there is actually the various companies who are involved in that work. And finally, clicking on the foil, you'll actually see a key part of what I think will make this project work, and it's another aspect of partnership. And this is really Fujitsu investing 20 PhD studentships into Wales to help promote the research and innovation aspirations, of the various partners within the project. That's pretty important, and it has been a great attraction for the community. And what's spun out of those are these so-called R&I development projects. They're projects where there's a much shorter-term funding requirement to move a product to market, so it may not be a PhD studentship, but nevertheless there is a fundamental requirement for it. Moving on to slide 9, you can see there's a quick summary there of what will happen in phase 2. So as I've said, there's a couple of 6,000 core systems being rolled out literally as we speak into Swansea, a capability and a capacity subsystem, and into Cardiff. So a nice Christmas present, I guess, for those 2 institutions, together with novel architecture subsystems, so GPU systems, again, going on to both sites. Moving on to slide 10, this is just a very quick summary, and I won't go into it in any depth. You can take a look at it at your leisure. But this is looking at a number of benchmarking codes which are important to the users on HPC Wales. Quantum Espresso, which is Dynamics, WRF, which is the weather research forecasting 4D basic data set, and then OpenFOAM, which is clearly from CFD. And what we're trying to show there is the performance relative to a corresponding Westmere core count of both the capability, 2.9 gigahertz processing based cluster, and a 2.6. And if you just click again on that file, you'll actually see that the capacity system, so these are the 2.6 gigahertz, are coming in at about 1.52 times Westmere, the capability at about 1.64. So clearly a major benefit in moving forward together with Sandy Bridge. The next slide is really showing, or trying to capture, should I say, the provisioning of this service for both new HPC and Windows users, and this is very much based around Fujitsu's Symfoniway middleware, which is a point-and-click approach to enable users who are completely ignorant of Linux and command line to actually be able to start productively running simulations or applications or analyses, and also provision for experienced HPC and Linux users. So we provide SSH access, so command line control and job submission coming into the system. If we go on to slide 12, I mentioned right at the outset the work that we're doing with Exede, and I'd like to give really a special thanks to Scott Lathrop, Dan Stanzioni, and Kay Hunt from within the Exede team for really helping us define various components of the service. So scientific gateways is one example, providing a variety of training material to really enable us to take forward the Skills Academy, and then launching for us what is really important, namely this Campus Champions program, where we have representatives in each of the local institutions who are acting as advocates for the service. All of those 3 components, I think, are really important, and working with Exede, who've been incredibly helpful, has really benefited the project enormously. On to slide 13. I think for us it was really important that when a user first comes onto the service, then this sort of strap line of user productivity at first login is a genuine claim. So various components identify their single user identity, so as they're moving across the network, they don't need to be having multiple access points. Common reusable services, clearly important, so each of the sites has effectively a mirror of the application space which is available across HPC Wales. Building these optimized user workflows, so best practice, clearly publishing the workflows from one priority sector area into other sector areas, again, really important thing to be able to do. And the development of the dedicated portal, which provides really an entry into the whole gateway infrastructure within HPC Wales. And speaking of gateways, if you come on to the next slide, one of the challenges we have at the moment, I think, in terms of trying to stand up a variety of science gateways, and clearly gateways include a variety of things, but essentially it's such that a user from a given scientific domain can come onto a system and be very familiar, whether that be through data collections, collaboration spaces, computation and viz facilities. They recognize that and can be productive very, very quickly. The temptation and the question is, do we go deep? In other words, we only really stand up gateways for one or two application domains, energy, environment, and life sciences, I mentioned, are really important. Or do we go wide? And I've shown on the right the priority sector areas, so actually standing up a SymfiniWay environment across all of those may be tricky. So we've looked together with Exede at looking to actually capitalize on the wide variety of open source gateway capabilities actually within the Exede project itself. And if we come on to the next slide, then kind of that's it, as they say. But there are probably three takeaway messages that I'd like to try and sort of leave you with. And they're captured there. So the speed of innovation, we need to react really rapidly, and we need to provide capabilities that will promote rapid growth in business, and they need to be able to see the potential and see it quick. So we can't rest on our laurels. The speed of innovation is critical for us. The long-term investment in infrastructure, software, and people is critical. HPC Wales is actually a 10-year project, so the 42 million is the initial 5 years worth of funding. But sometimes it's quite hard to convince funding agencies that investing in the long term is needed to really promote this type of activity. And then finally, for us and for our researchers and developments, we need to be providing a complete solution. So there's no point expecting people to go up an incredibly steep learning curve and to be able to master and become before they can use the service. So we need to provide training and education within our higher education institutions and to our customers. We need to optimize and tune whatever they're doing on the system, and we need to be providing that level of support and training, effectively through the lifetime of the project. And if we manage to do that, then I think we will be successful. So what I've tried to do, I'm probably slightly overrunning in time, but is to give you an idea of where we are today, the progress that we've made since David first gave his summary to you. And if you've got any obvious questions and things that you'd like to ask, then please fire away.
Well, terrific. Well, thank you, Martyn. I had a question about your business model for the organization. Is it expected to turn a profit, or is it strictly like a government-funded consortium thing to further these efforts? Because it sounds expensive what you're doing with high-speed networks and everything else.
Well, I think sustainability of the project and developing a sustainable business model is clearly critical. I think if we go back and ask for another handout of 40 million, then we're going to be, for want of a better word, pushing our luck. And we're focusing pretty heavily not only on hitting the output targets, which we've been given against that funding. So there's a variety of those output targets, and that's diagnostic, in WEFO speak, Welsh European Funding Office, that's diagnostics and systems, collaborative projects, jobs created, a whole bunch of targets. But while we're delivering against those and while we're proving that the project is successful, then sustainability for us is a key requirement. And really sustainability comes in three shapes. I mean, it's funding the people, which is the most important component, I believe, of any sustainability model. There's provisioning new technology, and that's expensive. It's something, I don't remember the exact breakdown, but it's to the order of 20 million, 18 million on new technology. And then there's clearly funding the cost of the electricity and power to drive all this stuff process forward. Our sustainability model will hopefully get us a long way down the track, such that in 5 years' time, we're certainly in a position to table a match against any potential funding opportunity. But whether those funding opportunities come from within Wales, whether they come from within the UK more generally, whether from within Europe and PRACE, we've got a couple of years to build those models, but we aim to be sustainable at the end of the project.
Well, that's terrific. So, when David Craddock first presented this, I have to say I came away with the wrong impression as far as your customers. I thought, oh, these guys are going to help Joe Machine Shop use simulation. And what you've presented here are some very technical companies in their own spaces, right, are using these resources, looks like. Is that typical of the kind of user base you want to help?
I think, to be honest, there's a complete spectrum ranging from those who need a bit of a hand to help process what may be some of their more standard IT processes that they're embarking upon today. So handling, spreadsheets more efficiently, being able to look at a million-line Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, right the way through to those who are doing complicated rendering, who are using detailed simulations to be modeling and building up processes in catalysis, to media creativity, so rendering. There's a whole spectrum of application areas and users with quite different expertise. So the training and outreach is trying to build the expertise level right the way through that community, running specific courses in depth around applications, but at the same time, dare I use the phrase MPI for dummies, that type of introductory thing into parallel processing, a very wide spectrum of capabilities. So we need to be provisioning for novice users, so the SymphonyWay, Windows systems, workflow systems that they don't need to know anything about the nuts and bolts under the hood, right the way through to experienced users who want to improve the scalability of their code from maybe 256 processors today to 6,000 processors tomorrow. It's a complete spectrum of expertise that we basically need to be carrying out developments, innovations across that whole community space.
Yeah, and along those lines, when you listed your partners, Martyn, there was Microsoft, and I have to imagine that they have a very strong presence in that user base you just described, and I'm wondering how important is their participation, and how are they helping you?
Really in a variety of ways, and not so much in the HPC space itself. One of the biggest challenges we have is building a dual boot Windows environment which can take any brand of MPI, which can take any brand of job scheduler, and be routinely robust against processing Linux jobs, against processing Windows jobs. So a lot of what they're doing is helping more on the sort of PR side of the thing, so building relationships, organizing workshops, promoting HPC as a concept as much as anything else. So getting the message out there to a very broad audience, they have probably a pretty vital role in that. Less so in the nuts and bolts of how well HPC runs on Windows servers, and that really has been in the capable hands of Fujitsu carrying that particular technological thread forward.
Well, great. Well, Martyn, kind of a wrap-up question here. I mean, if we have listeners out there that are interested, how hard is it to kick the tires and engage with you guys?
It's completely trivial. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? I think our main focus has to be on Wales and has to be on the community of Welsh SMEs. Having said that, our funding model certainly permits us to engage with any interested customers out there. So I would warmly welcome any approaches to HPC Wales, and Georgina, certainly our marketing manager, will be the first person to go to. If anybody's interested based on what you've heard today, then please come back and we'd be delighted to give you more. And it's open arms time. We welcome anybody, I think, into HPC Wales, because building a capability with a broad set of partners, and I've tried to emphasize collaboration and partnership through this. We work, for example, with Exede. We work across into a number of European supercomputer centers. I mean, we're not insular. We try not to be. We have to satisfy the funding requirements in terms of focusing on Welsh SMEs, but we're very open for business to anybody who would like to come and have a chat.
Well, that's terrific. Well, Martyn Guest, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Richard. And if I come back in a couple of years' time and we've hit all the targets, then I'll speak to you then.
I'll count on that. That sounds good.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard.
You bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on high-performance computing.